What does Erich Gainsborough, Adolf Hitler, and the legendary civilization of Hyperborea all have in common? Hint, they're all dead as fuck is not the answer I was looking for, so come with me as I take you through the twists and turns of a FF7 theory that might just blow your mind. Or, at the very least, add a bit more propulsion to your remake excitement thrusters. It all began on a solemn Tuesday. I was going over my YouTube analytics and realised how much I suck, and then it happened. The call that changed everything. Hello?
FF7 Hype.
What could it mean? And so I began researching every word that mysterious caller could have meant before we got disconnected from hyperactive to hyperimmune, hypersaline. And then I saw it. Hyperborea. Oh, something told me this was important, and so in pursuit of answers I travelled far, spoke with mystic men, I journeyed deep into forgotten places few would dare to tread. Now what I found, a link so profoundly uncanny between a lost mythical race of people called the Hyperboreans, dating back as far as the 7th century BC, and the Cetra from FF7. See, I've always been interested in the Cetra. I've always been curious about them. You know, they're a nomadic people who travelled country to country, not planet to planet like the Western mistranslation first led us to think. But what they did is they nurtured the continents. They communed with the planet. They had a spiritual connection of it. Some of them got tired of moving around, obviously. The way I imagine it. Oh, listen, mate. I don't know how to tell you this, but the wife she's sick of moving around all the time. But Brian, it's our duty.
Brian, if that's Azrael again, tell him to piss off.
Sorry, dude. She's doing my head in. I'm just gonna stay put. Yeah. Why, Brian? So yeah, they settled down, they got complacent, they lost the ability to hear the planet's voice, and basically became what regular old humans are today. A bit shit. And I really can't wait to see how Square Enix present the Cetra in the remake, what we might learn about them, what extra juice might be added to the goose, especially after the way the FF15 team put an incredible, verging on admirable amount of effort into leaving those highly symbolic ruins of ancient Solheim, dotted all around Eos, all of which were beautifully designed in a way that left an intriguing breadcrumb trail to follow. Just from the imagery of that architecture alone left this huge story of Solheim. Now think what they could do with that in terms of the remake, and in places like the Ancient City, the Temple of the Ancients, two different Cetra sites that Square now have a golden chance to do, archaeological storytelling. But I digress from the case, my dear Watson, let's get back to it. So turns out that these Hyperboreans we're going to be talking about, they were a race who some believed that they lived beyond the North Winds. And while they were also nomadic in some descriptions from famous ancient Greek historians like Homer, Herodotus, Hesiod, they also described the Hyperboreans as pilgrim founders. Very similar to Cetra. Then we go on a bit further, later figures down the line, because this Hyperborean myth is appeared time and time again in history. It's almost as up there as the legend of Atlantis. I can't actually believe I've never heard it before. But later figures like Russian philosopher and occultist Helena Blavatsky, she states that the Hyperboreans had a land that they called Paradesh. So a specific land called Paradesh, and it was a divinely given place, divinely given and accessed, where the sun only set once a year, which would lead later legend pursuers to place Hyperborea in the Antarctic, where at the poles the sun does actually only rise and set once each year on the equinox. A place where a certain dude in the 1930s invested a lot of money exploring, but we're getting too ahead of ourselves. Are you taking notes, Watson? Now, admittedly, the location is all over the place of where Hyperborea might have been. Greek mythology of the Boreas, that claims that it was a land in the north of Greece, or specifically around Thrace. But as the purple-winged god Boreas in the mythology himself is described, he's also the god of winter, who chills the air with his icy breath. But beyond his mountain laid a special home called Hyperborea that sat magically in eternal spring, untouched by the god's wind. Now, the people themselves were supposedly highly pure and spiritual in nature, a perfect people. They formed one of the first theocratic governments, that being that a singular divine being, in this case a goddess, was recognized as their supreme guidance. And the land itself produced 2 crops of grain a year, but most of the countryside, and this is the important bit, was covered in enchanting tall magical forests, sometimes called the Garden of Apollon, and according to Greek poet Pindar, the road to Hyperborea could not be found by simple ship or foot. And going on further, the other side of the city is described to have had a bitterly cold ice tundra with frozen peaks, virtually impassable, cursed with eternal winter. Much like here in England, we're cursed with eternal goddamn precipitation. Now, the city itself is a magical place. Again, it's natural, it's serene, it's filled with rivers and pools of water. And at the centre, there is a sacred circular site that is dedicated to, guess what, ritual sacrifice. Now, just to be clear, they killed cows, not undeserving maidens. Yet, interestingly, maidens are kinda the Hyperboreans' main jam. It's described so many times, they say that maidens were the founders of the site, that aspects of the government were matriarchal and run by, the word maidens. Even in the poem of Hyperborea from, again, Pindar, he says, "Never the muses' absence from their ways. Lyres clash and flutes cry, and everywhere maiden choruses whirling. Neither disease nor bitter old age is mixed in their sacred blood. Far from labour and battle they live." Maidens were even sent from Hyperborea to take offerings and be of service to neighbouring kingdoms, which they had to stop doing after a small while because, again, human shit. But I guess you could say they were maidens who travelled through the planet.
Jesus,
yeah.
Can you hurry up?
Absolutely. So here I am, buried deep in the lore of this potentially Atlanto-Nordic conspiracy. And like all good conspiracies, the Nazis are involved. See, most people forget just how far Hitler and the Nazis actually went with this kind of esoteric Nazism. Tons of research, propaganda, money actually went into spreading the idea of pure race Germans, not just the blue-eyed, blonde-haired Aryan supremacy kind of stuff. They fully and deeply believed other ideologies like the one explored by Richard Walther Dare. He was a Reich Minister of Food and Agriculture, but also a leading Nazi ideologist, and he wanted to prove definitively that the German peasantry were ascendants of a homogeneous race of pure blood Nordics. So here's our first figure. Our second for this tinfoil hat exploration is Miguel Serrano. He went even further. He was a prominent Chilean diplomat, writer, and fascist activist in the Nazi movement, and he claimed he had evidence that the Aryan blood was extraterrestrial in origins. That it came from a race of pure fallen angels, and that of all the races on Earth, it was the only one that had the ability to preserve memory of its divine ancestry in the noble blood. It had access to a pool of memory. Goddamn. Anyway, this chap Serrano, who emerged from an occult type order that actually combined pro-Nazi sentiments along with ceremonial magic and Kundalini yoga. Yep. Try to get that out of your head. While he was expanding on the Book of Enoch that he had read, he was lamenting how infuriated he was that the blood of the Hyperboreans had been mingled with regular Neanderthal man, and that it was watered down, making it harder for them to access the power that lie within. Is this reminding you of anyone else's frustration? You might know. You guys are getting the analogies, you're getting it. I trust your intelligence to follow this along. So Serrano was as crazy as Man Hojo. Now this all sounds pretty crazy, right? Hard to believe that these were actual thoughts in high-ranking Nazi leadership. These weren't just some extremist nutcases at the bottom. These guys were actually utilised, weaponized in how seriously Nazi Germany took this type of racial purity propaganda. It was huge. In fact, many books like what Serrano and Dare themselves wrote, they almost sold as widely as what Hitler's Mein Kampf sold. Which is nuts. These guys worked intimately with figures as large as even Heinrich Himmler, who was also a lifelong occultist, and worked painstakingly hard to incorporate esoteric ideologies, as well as even symbolism and ritual into the SS, into their uniforms, into their practice. They took this seriously. It was a foundation of the Nazi worldview, and while not the main reason, it was definitely a part of what motivated them to host major expeditions in the Antarctic. We even know that Himmler himself, he set up a Nazi think tank called the Anunnaki. Translation, inherited from our forefathers. Later on, it was called Russia, and this think tank funded expeditions into places, naming just one, southwestern Sweden, to examine petroglyph rock carvings that they believed predated all known systems of writing. And that again, too, that this may have been created by this race called the Hyperboreans. And now in comes our fourth and most important figure I want to discuss, Hermann Wirth. Now, he was made actual president of this project, and as you can probably guess what his mind was most on, yep, Hyperborea. He studied everything from Thule Icelandic connections, Holy Land connections in Tibet. He even travelled to India to check out the Rig Vedas, from which he concluded all humans, not just the ones that the Nazis didn't like. And this is key, because this is what got Wirth into trouble, but he believed that every human had this divine blood ancestry in their veins, that it just had to be re-remembered, it had to be relearned from by history. That's why he explored it with such passion and somewhat devotion. To the point he even mastered over 100 ancient languages. Jeez, imagine 100. And he supposedly traced back the first proto-human language. No, what he theorized was the single-pointed origin of all world languages. And in his description, he viewed the Hyperboreans as a refined, simple, yet ultimately spiritual folk who believed that the whole world was permeated with divine energies, whose voices they were able to listen to. And this is where it gets really weird. So yeah, I'm comparing Wirth to Gast, because just like Wirth's love for the subject, now of course Gast, he was actually in love with the Cetra he was studying, and not only do both professors work under militaristic authoritarian regimes trying to take over the world, but both were also betrayed in their work by none other than, yep, you guessed it, the guy I'm comparing to Hojo, Dere, the counterpart of Hojo in the story, because Wirth didn't really buy into the regime's totalitarianism. Like I said, he believed that Hyperborean descendant purity belonged in all Earth's people, regardless of even skin colour, religion, race, gender, and he and even many of his like-minded thinkers, they were even figureheads in helping to lead an anti-Hitler conspiracy. They helped numerous persecuted people, including Jews, actually get to safety during those dark World War II eras. So giving refuge, just like for Eris' mother, this then led our slightly nuttier Desse to go to our Shinra leader Himmler, Nazi leader Himmler, and he actually got Wirth removed from office for not sharing the anti-Jew sentiment. The Gestapo then actually stormed his house, and many of Wirth's artifacts and research was confiscated, and he was placed under house arrest. My own noodles getting blown by this. But wait, there is more, because you see, the Nazis, they preferred someone like Miguel Serrano's way of viewing Hyperborea, tied in with the racism, with the anti-Semitism, because he told the tale of Hyperboreans as being wiped out from existence by what he called the Demiurge, which just so happens to be another name, and it was the one that the Nazis were using to describe the Jewish deity, you guessed it, Jehovah! No, for real, for freaking real, man. The mythical, magical race with a promised land the Nazis were trying to find were wiped out by Jehovah. Come on. If this doesn't get me a subscribe from you, what will? Jeez. And anyway, they continue on a bit, though. They say that it was actually why the Hyperboreans fell into complacency. They rebelled, they started to settle down and intermingled their blood with humans who were contaminated with the demiurge Jehovah, and through doing so, paradise was lost. The location and the access was lost to them. And just to put a little bit of a cherry atop this conspiracy bakewell, there's a reason why I haven't actually shown you an image of Professor Wirth yet. Ready? Here we go. This is Wirth, and this is Gast. Oh, I don't know. It's kind of their, I mean, even their names, for example, this is a bit of a stretcher, but Gast in German means guest, as well as being a term used for customers of a pub or bartender. And then Wirth is actually based on the word Wirt, which is the actual word for bartender. So in German, when a Gast walks into a bar and Wirt asks, "What can I get ya?" Gast replies, "A big old pint of mind blown." And yeah, even the combination of Gast, Wirt is in itself a name for a bartender. Okay, so what does this all mean that Square Enix actually based this around the Cetra? I don't know. Maybe they knew about it. Maybe someone based it off of that. I mean, Square Enix have pulled from finer threads before, but to the degree of accuracy as to how the land is described, where it is geographically placed, the authoritarian regime, the communing with the planet, the dynamic of betrayal amongst professors, it's all pretty wild. What I want to finally finish off on, because I don't want to make this video too long and too crazy, but notice those little black new shadowy things that float around in the remake trailers. We don't really know what they are yet. All we know is that they're called the Watchmen of Fate. They seem very interested in Aerith. What I've kind of speculated at what they might be, and I know other people have as well, is are they the memory of the ancients? The ones that we see later in the temple, Aerith speaks with them, ones that lingered on the planet. They selflessly didn't pass over and rest because they wanted to guide and preserve the last remnants of the Cetra. And I'm wondering, is that them? Is that how Square Enix are going to present them? Ancient Cetra figures whose role is to guide and direct the rivers of fate. Make sure things that happen in the orders they need to happen. And I only bring this up because one of the other crazy things about Hyperborea is while they were not a violent or a warring nation, that in times when they were attacked, myth says that ghostly black shadow warriors would come to guide them in battle. I think it's pretty cool. So there we go. That's what Aerith, Hitler, Hyperborea, Kundalini Yoga Nazis all have in common. I'm FF Peasant. Give this video a like if it gave you a modicum of entertainment, even just a bit, just a bloody morsel, mate. Even if it didn't, Squid, it did anyway. Help a man out. I've got doges to feed, do it for them. And as always, let me know what you think in the comment section below. Until the next conspiracy video, Kupo!